Adam did not die quietly. According to ancient Ethiopic tradition, the first man's final moments were not about an ending. They were about prophecy warning and the future salvation of humanity. Most people know Genesis. They know Adam lived 930 years, then died. But the Ethiopic Adam tradition tells a much deeper story. It tells us what happened in those final days in that sacred cave, when the weight of the world fell silent. This is the story that shaped how ancient Christians understood death inheritance and the long chain of salvation. And it begins with an old man who knew he was running out of time. After nearly 1,000 years on earth, Adam felt death approaching. He had walked in Eden, once tasted fruit that grew without his labor, breathed air untouched by sorrow. That world was gone. He had lived long enough to see his children multiply, to watch entire generations carry his name and his sin into a broken world. Now lying in the cave of treasures, the sacred place where he and Eve had retreated after the expulsion, Adam understood something that old men in every age have learned. The end was coming. He called for Seth. Seth was not his eldest son. Cain had killed Abel, and the weight of that loss had never left Adam's chest. But Seth was the one God had given as a replacement. Seth was the righteous seed, the line through which salvation would eventually flow. And Seth was the one who had to know. Seth was the one who had to hear what the first man had learned in 930 years of living. When Seth arrived at the cave, Adam told him what to do. Gather your children. Adam said, gather your grandchildren. Bring them all to me. Seth obeyed. The family came. They filled that cave, descendants of the man who had named the animals, who had worked the soil with his own hands, who had felt paradise slip away the moment his teeth closed on forbidden fruit. When Adam saw them all standing before him, he wept. The ancient text says his tears fell like water. His voice trembled, not from pain, but from knowing he would soon be separated from all of them hidden beneath the earth. This is the emotional center of the Ethiopic Adam story. It is not about a man dying of old age. It is about a father recognizing that his life was the beginning of a long story, and that he would not be there to see how it ended. It is about a man who had to pass something on before the night came. Adam did not speak to them about his accomplishments. He did not talk about Eden or the days when the world was young. Instead, he warned them. He told Seth, and through Seth, all his descendants, the world you live in is full of sorrow and weariness. This was not poetry. This was not exaggeration. Adam had lived long enough to know that life outside Eden was a struggle. He had seen pain enter the world through sin, had watched it spread through his own bloodline, had felt it deepen with every generation. You will face temptation, Adam told them. Satan, who deceived your mother and me, will come to you in many forms. This warning was urgent because Adam knew something that his descendants would forget over and over again. Satan does not come as evil. He comes disguised. He comes as doubt, as a whisper, as something that feels natural or reasonable or even good. Satan had come to Adam and Eve in the garden, dressed up as curiosity, as the promise of wisdom, as something they could reach for without consequence. And it had cost them everything. Never listen to him. Adam commanded, never trust what he shows you, no matter how beautiful it appears. Adam knew he could not protect them by living longer. He could only protect them by passing on what he had learned in his 930 years. That knowledge, that warning, was his final gift. It was the only thing he could leave them that mattered. But then Adam did something unexpected. He gave Seth burial instructions. His body was not to be left in the cave forever. Instead, it was to be wrapped carefully with myrrh, with aloes, with cassia. These were sacred spices. They were not meant to preserve the body for comfort or vanity. They were meant to honor it as holy. Adam's body was to remain in the cave of treasures, with the other treasures that God had given them, the holy signs brought from Eden. But even that was temporary Adam, then spoke of something that would not happen in his lifetime, or in Seth's, or for many generations. He prophesied that a great flood would one day cover the earth. The waters would rise and destroy everything, and only a few would survive in a vessel, an ark. When that day came, Seth's descendants must remember. They must take Adam's body from the cave and carry it into the ark. This is a strange prophecy, but it is central to the Ethiopic Adam tradition. Adam's body becomes an object of sacred continuity. It is not left behind, it is carried forward through the flood, through the waters of judgment, into the new world beyond. After the floodwaters receded, Adam said his body must be placed in the middle of the earth, and there, in that central place, salvation would one day come. The Ethiopic tradition does not explain the middle of the earth in geographical terms. Instead, it carries the language of sacred geography, a place appointed by God, a location where the destiny of humanity would be resolved. In the Christian reading of this text, the meaning becomes clear. The fall began with Adam. Sin entered through his disobedience. Death came because of his choice. But the redemption of humanity would come through God's plan, through salvation that reaches back and undoes what Adam's sin had done. And in the Ethiopic understanding, Adam's body carried through the waters of judgment and placed at the center of God's plan becomes a symbol of that redemption. The first man's death, then, is not presented as the end of a person. It is presented as the beginning of a long chain. Seth comes next, carrying the warning and the responsibility. Then Noah, who must remember to take Adam's body into the ark. Then the generations after the flood, who must know where that sacred body has been placed. And finally, the one who comes to bring salvation. Adam understood this in his final days. He was not simply a grandfather blessing his descendants. He was a link in a chain passing forward something that had to be remembered, something that could not be lost. He was making sure that the story of Adam would not end with him. This is why the Ethiopic Adam tradition mattered so much to ancient Christians, especially in Ethiopia. It was not just about the first man. It was about understanding that death is not silence, that our choices, our warnings, our sacred knowledge must be carried forward, that the fall was not the final word, that God had a plan long before the foundation of the world, and that even Adam's death was part of it. When Seth saw his father's body prepared with those sacred spices, when he understood that he would have to guard it, when he learned the prophecies that would not be fulfilled in his own lifetime, he carried a weight that no other person in history had to carry. He was the keeper of not just a body, but of a promise. He was the guardian of a prophecy that stretched beyond his own death, beyond his children's children, into a future he would not see. And he had to trust that it mattered. He had to trust that his father, the first man who had ever lived, had known something true about the future. The ancient Ethiopic texts say that Adam's final words filled Seth with both sorrow and strength. Sorrow, because Seth was losing his father and would soon be alone with the responsibility. Strength, because Seth now understood his own life in a larger context. He was not just a man living and dying. He was part of a story that God was writing, a story that had begun before the foundation of the world and would not be completed until God brought salvation to all of Adam's descendants. When Adam died, his body was prepared as he had commanded, the sacred spices wrapped around him. The cave of treasures became both a grave and a sanctuary. It held not just the body of the first man, but the memory of what he had said, the warning he had given, the prophecies he had spoken. Centuries later, when the waters rose and the earth was covered, Noah would remember. He would go to that cave, or his descendants would tell him where it was, and he would bring Adam's body into the ark. Not because Adam was a king or a warrior, or a man of great power, but because he was the first, and because his death was not an ending. It was the beginning of a promise. It was the start of a story that led forward through judgment and through grace to a redemption that would reach back and touch even Adam's sin. This is what the ancient Ethiopic tradition teaches us, that death in the hands of God becomes something other than conclusion, that the choices we make, the warnings we give, the truths we pass forward, do not die when we die, that they can be carried into the future by those who come after us, and that even the first man, the one whose sin brought death into the world, gets to see his legacy not as failure, but as part of a greater story, a story in which God's grace moves forward through time, bearing the weight of our fall, and moving toward our redemption. Adam's final days ended with his death, but the story Adam began did not end. It continued through Seth. It was carried through the flood by Noah. It moved through history and promise, until it reached the day when salvation came, when God's plan laid out before time began, finally reached the middle of the earth and brought healing to all of Adam's children.